September 6, 1939, marked another critical day in the early stages of World War II, as the German invasion of Poland continued to accelerate, revealing the devastating efficiency of the Blitzkrieg strategy. For Poland, it was a day of mounting desperation and heroic, yet increasingly isolated resistance. Meanwhile, the United Kingdom and France, now officially at war with Germany, continued their mobilization efforts and strategic planning, but faced growing challenges in deciding how best to support their beleaguered ally. Globally, the war's escalation led to new diplomatic maneuvers and adjustments, as countries worldwide reconsidered their positions in light of the rapidly expanding conflict. The events of September 6 showcased the unfolding complexity of the war, setting the stage for a protracted and far-reaching global struggle. The German offensive, relentless blitzkrieg. By September 6, German forces had advanced deep into Polish territory, executing a strategy of rapid movement and overwhelming force designed to encircle and destroy Polish military units before they could effectively mobilize a defense. The Blitzkrieg, or Lightning War, combined the use of mechanized infantry, fast-moving tanks, panzers, and concentrated air power from the Luftwaffe, creating a multi-layered assault that overwhelmed Polish defenses at multiple points simultaneously. On this day, German forces were closing in on Warsaw from multiple directions, having already cut off many Polish units in the west and the north. The city of Krakow fell to German forces on September 6, dealing a significant blow to Polish morale and further demonstrating the speed and effectiveness of the German military machine. The capture of Krakow not only provided a psychological advantage, but also disrupted Polish communication lines and severed critical supply routes to the south. Meanwhile, the Luftwaffe maintained its intense bombardment campaign, targeting both military and civilian infrastructure to sow chaos and panic among the Polish population. Key cities, including Warsaw and Lodz, were subjected to heavy bombing raids, leading to significant civilian casualties and destruction. The relentless air assaults were designed to paralyze the Polish command and control structures, as well as to demoralize both the military and the civilian population. German propaganda continued to paint the invasion as a necessary defensive action, aimed at protecting ethnic Germans in Poland and securing Germany's eastern borders. The success of the Blitzkrieg, however, was rooted in its sheer surprise and rapid deployment, catching Polish forces unprepared and unable to coordinate an effective resistance. Poland's desperate struggle, a nation on the brink. For Poland, September 6 was a day marked by a mixture of courage and despair. The Polish military, under the leadership of Marshal Edward Rydz Śmigły, continued to attempt a coordinated defense, but the rapid advance of German forces made this increasingly difficult. The Polish army's lack of modern equipment and outdated tactics, still largely influenced by World War I trench warfare, left them at a severe disadvantage against the modern, mobile warfare executed by the Germans. By this time, many Polish units were isolated from each other, fighting in pockets and unable to form a coherent front. In Warsaw, the government faced the grim reality that the capital might soon be under siege. Military and civilian leaders scrambled to fortify the city, preparing for a potentially devastating German assault. The population, though frightened, showed remarkable resolve, with many volunteering for civil defense duties and preparing makeshift barricades to defend their homes and neighborhoods. The Polish Air Force, heavily outnumbered and outgunned, continued to engage in skirmishes with the Luftwaffe, but their efforts were largely symbolic against the overwhelming might of the German air machine. Despite these challenges, there were moments of notable resistance. On the Vistula River, Polish forces launched a counteroffensive against the advancing Germans, achieving some local successes and delaying the German advance temporarily. However, these efforts were ultimately unsustainable without broader support or reinforcements. The Polish government, realizing the gravity of the situation, appealed to the Allies for more direct military assistance. There was growing frustration and a sense of betrayal among Polish leaders and military commanders, who felt abandoned by their British and French allies. The promised support seemed far off, and the reality on the ground was that Poland was largely left to fight alone against the full force of the German military. The Allied response: cautious mobilization and strategic hesitation. In the United Kingdom and France, the declarations of war on Germany on September 3 had triggered full-scale mobilization, but both nations faced strategic dilemmas about how best to proceed in aiding Poland. By September 6th, British and French military planners were still grappling with the question of launching a direct offensive against Germany or continuing with a more cautious, defensive posture. In the United Kingdom, Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain's government continued to prepare for a long war. The Royal Navy enforced a blockade against Germany, aimed at cutting off vital supplies and weakening the German economy. The British Expeditionary Force, BEF, was in the process of deploying to France, where it would join French forces along the Maginot Line. However, there was growing criticism, both domestically and from within the military, that Britain was not acting quickly enough to relieve the pressure on Poland. The British Royal Air Force, RAF, was engaged in reconnaissance missions and defensive preparations, but there was reluctance to conduct large-scale bombing raids over Germany due to concerns about potential civilian casualties and the strategic effectiveness of such actions. The War Cabinet debated the merits of an offensive strategy versus continued preparations for a defensive war, reflecting the broader uncertainty and strategic hesitancy that characterized the Allied response in these early days of the conflict. In France, the mood was similarly ambivalent. The French army had mobilized and moved into defensive positions along the Maginot Line, but there was little appetite for a direct offensive into German territory. French military leaders, still haunted by the memories of World War I, were cautious about launching operations that could result in heavy casualties without clear strategic gains. The limited incursion into the Saarland region was intended to test German defenses but was not followed up with any significant advance, reflecting a strategic conservatism that would later prove costly. Within the French government, there was growing concern over the speed of the German advance in Poland and the lack of effective coordination with the British. Prime Minister Édouard Daladier faced mounting pressure to take more decisive action, but the complexities of coalition warfare, combined with a deeply ingrained defensive mindset, hampered any move toward a more aggressive posture. International reactions, alignments and reassessments. The rapid developments in Poland and the broader conflict's escalation prompted a wave of reactions and recalibrations from nations worldwide. On September 6th, the diplomatic and strategic landscape continued to shift as countries reassessed their positions and potential roles in the emerging global conflict. In the United States, President Franklin D. Roosevelt remained committed to a policy of neutrality, but the American government closely monitored the situation in Europe. Roosevelt and his advisors were increasingly aware of the potential implications of a German victory in Poland and the broader strategic threat posed by a Nazi-dominated Europe. While public opinion remained firmly isolationist, there was a growing sense within the Roosevelt administration that the United States might eventually need to provide more substantial support to the Allies, even if direct military involvement was still off the table. In the Soviet Union, Stalin's government watched the unfolding events with a mixture of interest and opportunism. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, signed in August 1939, had provided a non-aggression guarantee from Germany and a secret agreement to divide Eastern Europe into spheres of influence. With German forces making rapid gains in Poland, Soviet military planners began preparing for a possible intervention to secure Soviet interests in the eastern part of the country. The Soviet press maintained a narrative of neutrality, framing the conflict as a capitalist war, but behind the scenes, Stalin was carefully calculating the right moment to act. In Italy, Benito Mussolini continued to advocate for peace while positioning Italy strategically. On September 6th, Mussolini reiterated his offer to mediate the conflict, proposing an international conference to negotiate a resolution. This offer was primarily a tactic to buy time and assess the evolving situation, as Mussolini was not yet prepared to commit Italy to the conflict. The Western Allies, however, largely ignored these overtures, viewing them as disingenuous and an attempt to weaken their resolve. Other European nations, particularly those on the periphery of the conflict, took further steps to protect their neutrality and prepare for potential spillover. Countries like Switzerland, Sweden, and the Netherlands reinforced their borders and began contingency planning in case of an escalation that might draw them into the war. These nations were keenly aware of their vulnerable positions and sought to avoid becoming battlegrounds in a conflict that seemed to be expanding rapidly. Media coverage and global public opinion. The global media continued to play a pivotal role in shaping public perception and understanding of the war. On September 6th, Newspapers, radio broadcasts, and newsreels provided updates on the military situation in Poland and the responses of the belligerent nations, highlighting both the human cost and the broader strategic implications. In the United Kingdom, the BBC and major newspapers like The Times and The Daily Telegraph reported on the ongoing mobilization efforts and the latest developments in Poland. Coverage focused on the need for national unity and the importance of preparing for a long and challenging war. Editorials called for increased support for Poland, even as doubts grew about the feasibility of direct military intervention. In France, the press covered the limited actions in the Saarland and the broader mobilization efforts, but there was a palpable sense of frustration and anxiety. Newspapers like Le Figaro and Le Monde reflected the French public's concern about the rapid German advances and the perceived lack of effective Allied action to assist Poland. Opinion pieces debated the merits of a more aggressive military strategy versus the need to preserve French strength for a longer war. In Germany, state-controlled media continued to push the narrative of a justified war effort, emphasizing the successes of the Wehrmacht and the righteousness of Germany's actions. Propaganda outlets like Völkischer Beobachter and Der Angriff highlighted the military victories in Poland and portrayed the war as a defensive struggle against foreign aggression. The propaganda aimed to maintain public morale and support for the war effort, even as the realities of a prolonged conflict began to set in. In the United States, newspapers such as The New York Times and The Chicago Tribune provided extensive coverage of the events in Europe, with detailed analyses of military movements and diplomatic developments. The American press remained largely neutral but increasingly recognized the potential impact of the war on global stability and U.S. interests. Opinion pieces explored the debate over isolationism versus engagement, reflecting the ongoing uncertainty within American society about the nation's role in the world. The broader impact and strategic implications. The events of September 6, 1939, underscored the rapidly evolving nature of the conflict and the challenges faced by all parties involved. For Poland, the day marked another step toward inevitable defeat, as German forces continued to advance and encircle key cities. The Polish government's appeals for more substantial Allied support reflected a growing sense of desperation and frustration, as the promised assistance seemed increasingly unlikely to arrive in time to make a meaningful difference. For the United Kingdom and France, the day highlighted the difficulties of transitioning from peace to war and the challenges of coordinating a unified response to German aggression. Both nations were still adjusting to the realities of a conflict that they had hoped to avoid and were grappling with the strategic uncertainties of coalition warfare. The debates over offensive versus defensive strategies, and the extent to which they could and should support Poland directly, reflected broader tensions within the Allied leadership that would continue to shape the early phases of the war. Internationally, the events of September 6 prompted further reassessments and strategic recalibrations. The United States maintained its official stance of neutrality but was increasingly aware of the potential global implications of the conflict. The Soviet Union, Italy, and other nations watched closely, each calculating how best to navigate the rapidly shifting geopolitical landscape to their advantage. Conclusion: a war unfolding and a world on edge. September 6, 1939, was a day of intensifying conflict and growing uncertainty, as the rapid German advance in Poland and the hesitant Allied response highlighted the complexities of the early days of World War II. The unfolding events revealed the challenges of coalition warfare, the limits of pre-war planning and preparation, and the unpredictable nature of a conflict that was beginning to engulf much of Europe and threaten global stability. For the nations involved, it was a time of critical decisions and strategic positioning, as they sought to navigate a war that was evolving faster than anyone had anticipated. For the people of the world, it was a time of fear, hope, and resilience, as they faced the prospect of another devastating conflict and the challenges that lay ahead. The events of September 6 set the stage for a war that would reshape the political, social, and economic landscape of the 20th century, leaving an indelible mark on history.